The chaos of battle raged around Commander Leo Marlowe as he stood on the bridge of the Vanguard, humanity's flagship and the heart of the Resistance. The glowing pulse of plasma weaponry lit up the dark expanse of space, echoing the violent dance between the human fleet and the Stellar Order's flagship, Dominion. The enemy's massive warship loomed in front of them, a symbol of the Galactic Empire's unquestionable power, and yet it was now faltering. "We're in range, Commander," said Lieutenant Race, his voice steady but tense. "Weapons are primed. Ready when you are." Marlowe's mind raced as he studied the display screens. The Dominion was not just a ship, it was the nerve center of the entire Stellar Order's military presence in this sector. Its destruction would send a message, not just to humanity, but to the entire galaxy. For too long, the alien overlords had ruled with an iron fist, controlling human colonies, subjugating them under the guise of peace. Marlowe's mission was simple: cripple their power, ignite the flame of rebellion, and inspire others to join the cause. "Fire," Marlowe commanded, his voice cold as the void of space itself. The moment the order was given, the Vanguard's cannons unleashed a storm of energy. Lances of focused plasma and charged particles arced toward the Dominion, striking its shields with a thunderous impact. The ship shuddered under the barrage, and for a fleeting moment, Marlowe allowed himself to believe they could win this. Then the enemy retaliated. A barrage of laser fire came from the Dominion, hitting the Vanguard's shields and sending violent tremors through the hull. Alarms screamed across the bridge as the ship's power systems flickered. "Shields holding at 50%, said Race, his voice strained. "We won't last much longer at this rate," said Commander Callie Rhodes, the Vanguard's executive officer, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "We need to disable their engines. Now." Marlowe's eyes flicked to the blinking red marker on the screen. The heart of the Dominion's power core. If they could breach that, it would bring the entire ship to its knees. But getting close enough to fire the final blow was suicide. The Dominion was too well defended, too powerful. Yet, in the madness of the moment, Marlowe saw something. An opportunity. "Prepare the Aquila shuttle for launch. I'll take a team in," Marlowe said, his mind already racing through the plan. "You can't be serious," Rhodes said, turning to him. "It's too risky. You'll never make it past their defenses." Marlowe met her gaze, his face set with determination. "If we don't take this risk, we're as good as dead. The human race is depending on us. I won't let this chance slip by." He turned to Lieutenant Race. "Guide me in." As Marlowe suited up in the cockpit of the Aquila, a sleek shuttle built for high-risk missions, he couldn't help but think of Earth. How many generations had lived and died under the rule of the Stellar Order? How many times had humanity been forced to bow and accept their place? But today was different. With the engines roaring to life, the shuttle rocketed out of the Vanguard, weaving through the explosions of distant starships. The Dominion's weapons locked onto the shuttle, and laser blasts grazed past, sending violent jolts through the frame. It was a suicide mission, but there was no turning back now. The twist came as they neared the flagship's outer hull. The Dominion's defenses failed to engage. A signal pulse, something human, something that shouldn't have been there, flashed across the radar. Marlowe paused, confused. Suddenly, a transmission crackled in his ear. "Commander Marlowe, we have an offer." The voice was cold, calculating, unmistakably alien. It was an invitation. The transmission crackled once more in Marlowe's ear, a voice more chilling than any alien enemy he'd ever faced. It wasn't a standard military call, nor was it a general of the Stellar Order. This was something else, something far more dangerous. "Commander Marlowe," the voice said, its tone impossibly calm for a moment of such chaos. "I am Elithor, High General of the Taraxian Fleet, and I am offering you a chance to end this war, before it consumes everything." Marlowe's hands tightened around the shuttle's controls, his mind racing. The Taraxians were one of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy, known for their brutal efficiency and mastery of advanced combat tactics. They were loyal members of the Stellar Order, their fleets often acting as the tip of the spear in any military campaign. Marlowe's first instinct was to ignore the message, to silence it, and keep his focus on the mission. But then he thought about the stakes. The Dominion was still firing on the Vanguard. Time was running out. If this offer was genuine, if there was any hope of turning the tide, he had to know more. Why? Marlowe demanded, his voice strained from the stress of the assault. Why would a Taraxian want to help humanity? I seek to free my people from the chains of the Architect, Elithor responded, his voice lowering. For centuries, we have been puppets, playing out the Architect's will. And now, I see it, the truth of what he is, what he wants. It's not power, it's not control, it's something far darker. And you, Commander, are the key to stopping him. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marlowe's pulse quickened. The Architect, the ancient being who had orchestrated the rise of the Stellar Order, bending the galaxy to his will for millennia. Marlowe had heard whispers about the Architect. Rumors passed among the oldest rebel cells, but he had always thought them to be just that, rumors. Now the High General of the Taraxians was speaking about him as if he were real. Tell me what you know, Marlowe said, his voice a mix of desperation and curiosity. There was a pause before Elithor spoke again, quieter this time. The Architect is not an alien. He is something older, something beyond our understanding. He manipulates the very fabric of the galaxy, shaping civilizations and erasing others. The war against humanity was no accident. It was his plan to break you, to make you a tool in his long-term designs. He has done this before, with other races, other worlds. And now he believes humanity is ripe for the taking. But he underestimated you. Marlowe swallowed, trying to process the enormity of what he was hearing. The Dominion's engines flared in the distance as it began to regain power. They were running out of time. Why tell me this? Marlowe asked. Why not just crush us with your fleet? Because we're already lost, Elithor said, his voice tinged with regret. I cannot stand by and let him do this to another race. I can help you. I can give you the information you need to strike at the heart of his power. But you must act quickly. The longer you wait, the harder it will be to stop him. The comms went silent for a heartbeat, and Marlowe's mind raced. He glanced at the Dominion, watching the massive warship regroup, its weapon systems realigning. A decision had to be made. Elithor, Marlowe said, his voice grim but resolute. What's your price? There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then, in a low voice, Elithor spoke. I will join your rebellion, but I ask for one thing in return, the truth. If humanity is to survive, you must understand that the war is not just against the Stellar Order, it is against the Architect himself. Marlowe felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. Could he trust this alien general? Could he risk everything on a fragile alliance formed in the chaos of war? But there was no time for hesitation. The Dominion was already launching counterattacks, and the fate of humanity and the galaxy hung in the balance. Done, Marlowe said, sealing the deal. Give me what you have. I'm not going to let the Architect win. The transmission went silent. The shuttle's HUD flickered to life, revealing encrypted files, schematics, codes, and the location of an ancient facility deep within the heart of the Stellar Order. A facility that held the key to the Architect's control over the galaxy. As Marlowe prepared to send the data back to his fleet, he felt the first stirrings of hope, a glimmer of light in the endless darkness of war. But he also knew one thing with unshakable certainty. This was only the beginning. The Architect would not go down easily. The true battle had only just begun. The rebel fleet was in turmoil. The shocking revelation about the Architect and Elithor's defection to their side had sent ripples through the ranks of the humanity's last hope resistance. Some viewed the alliance as a necessary evil, a temporary compromise to destroy a greater enemy. Others, however, saw it as a betrayal, a concession to the very forces they had sworn to defeat. Marlowe, who had once been the unifying figure of the rebellion, now found himself at the center of a growing rift. The atmosphere aboard the Vanguard was tense as the fleet gathered in orbit around a forgotten moon on the fringe of human space. The war with the Stellar Order was far from over, but internal strife had become as much of a threat as any alien warship. Officers exchanged whispered conversations behind closed doors, and some began to openly question Marlowe's leadership. "I'm not sure I can follow him anymore," Lieutenant Race said, his voice strained. He sat across from Commander Kelly Rhodes in the war room, staring at the holomap that illuminated the dim room. "Aligning with Elithar, he's one of the architects of our suffering. We're allowing him to lead us into a war we might not be prepared for." Kelly rubbed her temples, a look of exhaustion clouding her features. "I understand the concern, but Elithar's information is solid. The architect has been pulling strings for millennia. And this war, our rebellion, has been part of his design. We need him to uncover what we don't know. But, you're right, we can't trust him completely." Outside the war room, the ship shook as another blast from Dominion's retaliatory assault struck one of the fleet's defensive positions. The battle was far from over, but Marlowe's mind was on more than just the physical war. He had to manage the ideological one. Humanity had come so far, had suffered so much, and yet now they faced a choice: continue to fight as they always had, with the pure aim of overthrowing the oppressors, or embrace the harsh truth that the galaxy's power dynamics were more twisted than they had ever imagined. "Commander Marlowe," came the voice of Lieutenant Riz over the comms, "we need to make a decision. Dominion is regrouping. Their fleet is heading toward us. We can't afford to keep questioning everything. We need action." Marlowe stood alone in his quarters, staring out at the stars, his thoughts heavy. The burden of leadership was no longer just about tactics and strategy. It was about keeping a fragile alliance from crumbling before it had even begun. How could he inspire his people to keep fighting if they didn't believe in the cause anymore? How could he unite humans and alien defectors under a single banner, when so many saw only betrayal in this new alliance? His mind flashed back to Elithar's words. "If you are to survive, you must understand that the war is not just against the Stellar Order. It is against the architect himself." But how could they trust Elithar to guide them? And more pressing still, if they were to defeat the architect, would they become something else entirely? A new empire, controlled by the same forces they had once fought to escape. He couldn't allow that. But the rebellion needed more than just human resolve. They needed something to change the balance of power. Suddenly, the hologram of Elithar flickered to life in front of him, his face impassive, almost eerily calm. "You're struggling," Elithar said, his tone clipped and understanding. "I see it in your eyes. The weight of command is breaking you." Marlowe clenched his jaw, trying to push aside his uncertainty. "We're on the verge of war. If your intelligence is correct, then the architect's plan is reaching its final stages. Our forces are stretched thin, and your people, the Taraxians, are not exactly beloved by everyone here. I can't afford a divided army." "I understand," Elithar replied. "But you must understand that we cannot win this war by fighting as you've always fought. The architect's influence is everywhere. The galaxy's civilizations, even those you think you can trust, are all pawns in his game. Humanity, however, can be something else. Your unpredictability, your creativity, your sheer will to survive. These are your greatest strengths. You are not bound by the same limitations as the others. Use that to your advantage." Marlowe took a deep breath, gazing once more at the war room's projections of the incoming battle. "And what about the cost? If we push forward with this alliance, if we accept your help, we risk becoming just another empire. What happens when the war is over? Will humanity become just another tool for someone else to wield?" Elithar's gaze hardened. "That is your choice, Commander. Humanity is the variable in this equation, the one element that could change everything. But if you hesitate now, if you give in to fear and doubt, you will ensure that the architect wins, no matter who sits on the throne. The transmission cut off, leaving Marlowe alone with the weight of his decision. His eyes hardened with resolve. There was no time for second-guessing. The Dominion was on the move, and every moment spent in hesitation was one more moment the architect could use to tighten his grip on the galaxy. The fleet had to act now, but the question remained, what kind of future would humanity fight for once the dust settled? Would they remain the oppressed, or would they forge a new path? And would it be one of freedom or domination? The days following the volatile discussions among the rebels were some of the most tense and uncertain Marlowe had ever faced. The Vanguard's crew was divided, morale low, and the whispers of betrayal echoed through the corridors. But the enemy didn't wait for internal strife to settle. The Dominion had regrouped, and with the Taraxian fleet joining the fray, the war raged on with unprecedented fury. Marlowe stood in the center of the command room, staring at the holographic map. The data Elithar had provided, the secret schematics, the architect's codes, the hidden messages, painted a terrifying picture. The architect wasn't simply a puppet master pulling the strings of the stellar order. He was far more insidious, a being who had learned to manipulate entire civilizations by controlling their very thoughts, their desires, their will. "We're running out of time," Callie Rhodes said, her voice strained. She stood beside Marlowe, eyes scanning the intel. The architect's influence goes deeper than we ever imagined. He's not just pulling the strings of the order. He's been meddling in the very history of humanity. Our rise, our wars, our alliances. We're not just fighting a galaxy-wide empire. We're fighting a manipulator who has controlled our destiny for centuries. Marlowe clenched his fists. "We've been his puppets all along," he muttered. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. The ancient civilization discovered in the Stellar Order's facility, the remnants of a once thriving species, revealed something horrific. The architect was not an alien. He was a being of unimaginable power, and he had lived longer than most races could fathom. He had manipulated species, entire planets, pushing them toward conflict only to sweep in at the perfect moment and shape them into tools for his own plans. Humanity was merely the latest in a long line of broken pawns. The real shock, however, came when Marlowe had seen something in Elithar's encrypted files. There were records dating back to Earth's early history. Marlowe had always believed that the first contact with the Stellar Order came with humanity's rapid expansion into space. But the files revealed that the architect had been influencing human history long before. The wars, the division, the betrayals, even the space programs. Humanity had never stood a chance. "We can't defeat him with brute force alone," Marlowe said, his voice a mix of anger and realization. "We need to understand how he's controlling everything. We need to find the source of his power before we become the next civilization to be completely reshaped." "Where do we begin?" Callie asked. "There's a place." Elithar's voice came over the comms, cutting through their thoughts like a blade. "An ancient nexus, deep within the Stellar Order's heart. It is the place where the architect's power originates. You must find it and sever the link between him and the galaxy's power structure. If you do that, his grip on the galaxy will shatter." Marlowe's heart raced. Elithar had been right. This wasn't just about defeating a military empire. The architect's power was far more dangerous. If they didn't stop him at the source, they would be fighting an endless war. Worse, they would become unwitting slaves to his designs, even if they managed to overthrow the Dominion and the Order. "I sent you coordinates," Elithar continued. "It's heavily guarded, but you must go. Every moment you delay, the architect solidifies his hold on this galaxy." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. "We don't have much of a choice," Marlowe said, his voice grim as he turned toward the map. "We go to the Nexus. We sever the architect's control. And we do it before this galaxy is nothing but his plaything." Callie nodded, her resolve hardening. Then we'll need to prepare for the fight of our lives. But as they rallied the fleet, one thought gnawed at Marlowe. The architect had manipulated the galaxy's every move for centuries. What if, in trying to destroy his power, they were walking straight into another of his traps? The possibility was too real to ignore, and it left Marlowe with an unsettling question. Was there ever a way to truly defeat the architect, or had their victory already been decided? The fleet gathered in tight formation, the ships brimming with tension and uncertainty. The mission ahead was one they knew could be their last, but it was the only path to ending the war. As the rebel ships prepared to jump to the coordinates Elithar had provided, the mood on the Vanguard was grim. Every crew member knew that they were not just heading into enemy territory, but into the very heart of the architect's power. Marlowe stood at the helm of the bridge, staring out at the swirling nebula that enveloped their destination. The coordinates had led them to a region of space so dense with cosmic anomalies that it had been deemed impassable by the stellar order itself, until now. It was here, in the heart of this unstable, treacherous expanse, that the architect's nexus was located. "The jump is complete," Lieutenant Rice reported, his voice tight with tension. "We're in position." Marlowe nodded, his heart pounding. "Prepare for the worst. All ships, stay sharp. We're heading into the unknown." Kelly Rhodes approached him, her expression hardened but resolute. "We've lost good men and women to the war. But this feels different. If Elithar's information is right, we're about to go toe-to-toe with the architect himself. We have to be prepared for anything." "I know," Marlowe replied, his voice low. "But this is the only chance we got to end it. If we don't stop him now, everything we fought for will be meaningless. The rebellion, humanity's freedom, all of it." Before Callie could respond, the ship shook violently, throwing them both off balance. The entire bridge crew scrambled to hold onto their stations as alarms blared. "Enemy contact," Ray's shouted, his eyes wide. "It's coming from the anomaly. It's a fleet." The holographic displays flared to life, showing dozens of unknown vessels emerging from the dense nebula. They were nothing like the sleek ships of the Stellar Order. Their designs were jagged, alien, twisted and warped, almost as though they had been pulled from another dimension entirely. "They're not part of the Order," Callie said, squinting at the screen. "What are they?" "They're part of the architect's defenses," Elithar's voice crackled over the comms. "The Nexus is not just a facility. It's a conduit for his power. The ships you see are his creations, manifestations of his control over reality itself. You must break through them to reach the core." Marlowe's stomach twisted. "You're telling me these ships aren't even real?" "They're real enough to kill you," Elithar replied, his tone grim. "But you must press on. The longer you hesitate, the harder it will be to undo the damage the architect has done. You are closer than you think." The Vanguard's hull groaned as more blasts struck its shields, and the other rebel ships scrambled to engage the enemy fleet. Marlowe's mind raced. This wasn't just a military operation anymore. They were entering a battle for the very fabric of reality itself. The architect was not just a ruler. He was a godlike entity, weaving the strands of existence itself. The ships in front of them were not just soldiers. They were the architect's manifestation, his weaponized reality. "We don't have much time," Marlowe said, his voice low but firm. "Focus on getting us through. We can't afford to be bogged down here. We break through, or we die trying." Rez nodded, fingers flying over the controls, engaging evasive maneuvers. "We'll get through, Commander." The Vanguard jerked forward, diving into the chaos of the battle as the strange alien ships closed in. Plasma fire illuminated the void, and the rebel fleet pushed forward with everything they had. But the enemy ships weren't just fighting. They were warping the very space around them, distorting the battlefield with impossible geometry. Some ships appeared to flicker in and out of existence, while others seemed to phase through walls of solid energy. "Incoming," Kelly shouted, her voice urgent. A massive energy pulse shot toward them from a ship at the center of the enemy formation, and the entire ship lurched as their shields absorbed the impact. Shields at 30%. Rise reported, his voice tight with panic. "We can't keep this up," Kelly shouted, fear creeping into her tone. "We're going to be torn apart if we don't make it through soon." Marlowe's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the battlefield. The enemy was relentless, but there was one thing they couldn't account for: humanity's ingenuity. It wasn't just their will to survive. It was their ability to adapt, to think outside the box when faced with impossible odds. The architect had underestimated them. "We're not just going to fight our way through this," Marlowe said, his voice steady now, conviction solidifying in his chest. "We're going to make our own way. Raise, take us into the heart of the anomaly. We're going straight through." There was a brief moment of silence on the bridge. Then Raise gave a sharp nod. "Aye, Commander. Hold on tight." The Vanguard shot forward, cutting through the distorted space at breakneck speed. The strange ships of the Architect's fleet tried to follow, but they couldn't match the Vanguard's unpredictable maneuvering. As they entered the heart of the anomaly, the fabric of space itself seemed to tear, warping and twisting around them. And beyond the chaos, a faint glow began to materialize in the distance, a single point of light, growing brighter with each passing second. It was the Nexus. Marlowe's breath caught in his throat. This was it. They were on the precipice of everything. But as they closed in on the Nexus, Marlowe couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Architect was waiting, and he wasn't going to let them destroy his creation without a fight. The Vanguard surged forward, its hull rattling violently as it cut through the distorted space surrounding the Nexus. The very fabric of reality twisted and buckled under the immense gravitational forces at play. Marlowe's grip tightened on the command chair as the ship's systems screamed in protest. Every inch they moved closer to the Nexus seemed to warp the space around them, turning every maneuver into a gamble. "Shields are critical," Race shouted, his voice trained. "We can't hold much longer, Commander. The gravitational anomalies are tearing us apart." Marlowe's gaze was fixed on the growing light ahead, a pulsing, radiant sphere that beckoned them forward. He had no illusions about what lay beyond that threshold. The Nexus was no mere structure. It was the heart of the Architect's power, the source of his control over the galaxy. If they could reach it, they could sever the Architect's grip. If they failed— "Race, we don't stop now," Marlowe said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Push through, or this war ends here." "Aye, Commander," Race replied, his fingers flying over the controls. He pulled the Vanguard into a sharp roll, narrowly avoiding a burst of energy from an enemy ship. The ship groaned, and the viewports outside flashed with the brilliance of combat. The rebel fleet was behind them, struggling to hold off the monstrous enemy formations. But this was Marlowe's fight. They were the spearhead now. The space around them began to shimmer, and Marlowe felt a sudden disorientation. It wasn't just the ship, it was everything. Time, distance, and even perception seemed to warp in on themselves. The boundary between the Vanguard and the Nexus thinned, as if reality itself was folding into a singularity. "We're through," Ray said in disbelief. Before them lay the Nexus, a colossal structure, unlike anything Marlowe had ever seen. It was as though the entire expanse of space was concentrated in one place, a sphere of pure, crackling energy, surrounded by a swirling vortex of color and light. The Nexus hummed with an almost imperceptible frequency, its presence vibrating in the very air of the bridge. "Do you see that?" Callie's voice was a whisper, awe mixed with dread. "It's not just a station. It's alive." Marlowe nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "It's a conduit, a bridge between the Architect and the galaxy. We sever that connection, we sever his power." The Vanguard slowed as it neared the Nexus, the ship shaking under the strain of the gravitational pull. The rebel fleet was struggling to maintain formation behind them. Their weapons fired sporadically, but their efforts seemed futile against the alien ships that were warping around them like living shadows. Elither's voice crackled in their comms once more. "You are close, Commander, but the Architect is aware of your presence. He will not let you destroy what he has created without a fight." Marlowe's blood ran cold. The Architect was already there, watching, waiting. His power extended far beyond what they had anticipated. The ships closing in on them weren't just weapons. They were extensions of his consciousness, his mind. The Nexus was his throne, and every step they took toward it brought them closer to his will. "We need to act fast," Marlowe said, turning to Kali. "Deploy the disruptors. We need to overload the Nexus core." Kali nodded, her jaw set with grim determination. On it, the disruption devices, a final act of desperation devised from Elither's blueprints, were loaded into the Vanguard's main cannon. These devices, based on the ancient Taraxian technology, were designed to scramble the Nexus energy, breaking its connection to the Architect's network. If they worked, they would tear the Architect's control to pieces. But if they failed, the Vanguard drew closer, the Nexus now pulsing in front of them. And the growing hum of energy became deafening. The entire bridge seemed to tremble as the sphere of power expanded, its surface shifting like liquid metal, as though it were alive and aware of their presence. "We're entering the breach," Reyes said, his voice tight. Suddenly, a new wave of distortion hit the ship, much stronger than before. The Vanguard lurched violently, and alarms blared as the space around them seemed to collapse into itself. The edges of the ship flickered, parts of it appearing to exist in multiple places at once. "They're trying to phase us out of existence," Kali shouted, eyes wide with panic. "We have to stay focused," Marlowe barked. "Get those disruptors ready. We'll fire on my mark." The ship groaned again, the gravitational forces threatening to tear it apart. Marlowe's chest tightened as he watched the Nexus pulsate faster, as if responding to the ship's proximity. This was it. This was the moment they had trained for. "Now, Reyes," Marlowe commanded, his voice unwavering. With a sharp motion, Reyes fired the disruptors. The Vanguard's cannon erupted in a brilliant burst of energy, shooting directly toward the Nexus. For a split second, everything froze. The universe held its breath. Then the energy hit the Nexus, and the universe seemed to explode. The shockwave shattered through space, and reality itself seemed to crack. For the briefest of moments, Marlowe thought they had succeeded. Then the Architect's voice, cold and infinite, echoed through the very fabric of space. "You think you can undo what I have woven for eons. You are but insects, swatting at the threads of destiny. But I am the Architect. You will never escape me." The ground beneath them shook, and the Vanguard was thrown into darkness. The Vanguard lurched again, the entire ship seeming to rip apart at the seams. Marlowe was thrown from his seat, crashing to the ground with a force that knocked the wind from his lungs. Sparks arced from the control panels, and the once gleaming bridge became a scene of chaos. Alarms blared, echoing in the confines of the command room. "Report," Marlowe barked, pushing himself up, his head spinning from the impact. "We've been breached," Reyes shouted over the din. It's not just the ship. Something's happening to us." Kali was already at her station, her fingers flying over the controls. "It's like we're inside his mind. The space around us is folding in on itself. We're caught in a trap." Marlowe's eyes snapped to the viewport. What had once been the smooth, pulsating surface of the Nexus now rippled with a violent, unnatural energy. The disruption wave they'd fired had struck, but instead of collapsing the Nexus as they'd hoped, it had triggered something much worse. Through the distortion, a colossal shadow emerged. It wasn't a ship, not a conventional weapon. This was something far more terrifying, a massive floating form made of shifting light and darkness, hovering just beyond the heart of the Nexus. The figure's very presence warped space, bending reality like a fragile piece of paper. Its shape was indistinct, amorphous, but it radiated a sense of cold, infinite power. The architect. His voice pierced through the chaos, not through speakers or comms, but directly in their minds. It wasn't an echo. It was a feeling, an overwhelming presence pressing in on their very consciousness. You think you can destroy me? Foolish creatures. You are as much a part of my design as the stars you cling to. I am the architect. I do not merely shape the galaxy. I am the galaxy. Every decision, every war, every victory, every loss, I have orchestrated it all. You are my creation. And now, you will cease to exist. A wave of raw, oppressive energy cascaded over them, and the walls of the vanguard seemed to buckle. The very air turned to liquid, stretching and pulsing with unnatural rhythms. Marlowe struggled to remain on his feet, his senses assaulted by the overwhelming power. Hold together, Marlowe shouted. He reached for the comms, his hands trembling. All ships, report. Stay focused. We have to keep moving toward the Nexus. But the fleet was silent. The distortion was too strong. The ships were disintegrating, flickering in and out of existence, caught in the same vortex of chaos that had ensnared the vanguard. It was clear now. They were not just battling an empire. They were fighting an entity beyond comprehension, an intelligence that existed on a higher plane of reality. Callie looked at Marlowe, her face pale. He's breaking us down from the inside. We can't fight this. The Nexus isn't just a weapon. It's the foundation of his existence. If we don't sever his connection to it, we'll all be consumed. We're not going down without a fight, Marlowe said, his voice firm despite the fear creeping into his mind. Callie, get those disruptors back online. Rez, prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're getting to the core. As he spoke, Marlowe's mind raced. The architect had controlled everything. Every war, every conflict in history, humans had fought and died on a stage set by the architect. But if the Nexus was the key to his existence, then it was also his weakness. They couldn't defeat the architect with brute force. They had to sever his link to reality itself. But how? The architect's power was unimaginable, and the Nexus was a manifestation of that power. They were no longer in the realm of tactics and strategies. This was a battle for the very fabric of existence. Commander, Callie called out, pulling him from his thoughts. The disruptors are ready, but we can't fire them from here. The gravity fields are warping the trajectory. We need to get closer. Marlowe's eyes narrowed. He knew what they had to do. They had to get to the heart of the Nexus. They had to confront the architect in his own domain, where the rules of the universe bent to his will. It would be the ultimate test of their resolve. Set course directly for the core, Marlowe said, his voice steady, even though his heart raced. We end this now. The Vanguard's engines roared to life, fighting against the overwhelming pull of the Nexus. As they sped toward the center, the very space around them seemed to twist and distort, as though the universe itself was fighting them, unwilling to allow them to reach the heart of the architect's power. Ilither's voice came through the comms, low and urgent. Do not hesitate, Commander. The architect is everywhere. He will try to turn your own thoughts against you. Fight him. Fight through it. Marlowe clenched his fists. We'll fight. We're humanity. We don't give up. We never give up. The Vanguard shot forward, plunging deeper into the Nexus, heading straight into the heart of the storm. But as the ship neared the core, the architect's power intensified, threatening to consume everything in its wake. Marlowe could feel it. His very mind was beginning to fracture, the reality around him crumbling. But they had no choice. They couldn't stop now. The Vanguard plunged deeper into the Nexus, every turn and maneuver harder than the last. Space itself was no longer a stable entity. It was a chaotic, ever-shifting void that seemed to bend and fold around them, distorting their perception and their sense of direction. Marlowe's vision swam as the gravitational forces twisted, and the entire ship groaned under the pressure. But the core was within reach, its blinding light casting an unnatural glow on the bridge. We're almost there, Riz grunted, his hands moving in a blur over the controls. But the distortion is getting worse. It's warping the ship if we don't stabilize soon. We don't have the luxury of time. Marlowe shouted, gripping the armrests of his chair. Push through. The core is within sight. Callie stood beside him, her face ashen, eyes flicking over the redouts. We need to get those disruptors in position. We're running out of time. The architect's presence is overwhelming. Suddenly, the entire ship shuddered again. The architect's voice rang out in their minds, more forceful and malicious than ever. You dare resist me. You cannot comprehend the true nature of your existence. I am the architect. Every moment, every movement, every life you have ever known, I have woven it. You are nothing but my creation, and I will unmake you. The force of the words was like a physical blow. Marlowe's head throbbed, his thoughts scattering like pieces of shattered glass. It was as if the architect was tearing at the very fabric of his consciousness, trying to drown him in a wave of despair and futility. But Marlowe fought back, shaking his head to clear the fog in his mind. This was what they had come for. He had to hold on. Humanity had to hold on. Elither, do you have a read on the core? Marlowe shouted through the comms, trying to push the architect's voice from his mind. He could feel the weight of the architect's presence trying to suffocate him, but he refused to yield. The response crackled through, faint but urgent. You are close, Commander. The Nexus is connected directly to the architect's mind. It is his very will. To destroy it is to break him, but he will not let you do so without a fight. He will try to bring you to your knees. You must not falter. The Vanguard lurched again, and suddenly, space warped around them. An entire portion of the bridge flickered, shifting between solid and intangible. The reality around them became a nightmare, with fractured moments from their past, images of lost comrades, fleeting memories of home, faces of loved ones lost in the war, streaking across the view screen. The architect was using their memories, their deepest fears, to break their resolve. I won't let him win. Marlowe shouted, rallying his crew. His voice felt like a beacon in the storm of chaos. Humanity is stronger than any illusion. We will take control of our own fate. Kali gripped her console, eyes focused, her voice unwavering. Commander, I've got the disruptors in place. We just need to hit the core. With a final defiant cry, Marlowe looked out at the heart of the Nexus, where the pulsing orb of energy seemed to grow ever larger. The space around it was collapsing into itself, a vortex that would consume everything in its path. Riz slammed the final switch. Disruptors are armed, Commander, locking onto the core. The Vanguard's weapons hummed, the energy building to a peak. The ship shook once more as the destabilizing forces grew, but Marlowe's mind was clear. They were not fighting for a victory over the architect. They were fighting for freedom, for the right to carve their own future. Now, Marlowe ordered, his voice steady as steel. With a flash of light, the disruptors fired. The beams of concentrated energy cut through the chaotic space, striking the core directly. The entire Nexus seemed to freeze for an instant, and then the shockwave hit. The Vanguard was thrown back, nearly losing control as the energy of the Nexus exploded outward in a violent burst. For a moment, Marlowe thought the ship would be torn apart. But then, slowly, the pressure on the ship lifted, and the overwhelming weight of the architect's presence began to fade. The space around them stabilized, and the warping reality returned to normal. And then, silence. The Nexus, the heart of the architect's power, began to crumble, its energy dissipating into nothingness. The enemy ships, once manifestations of the architect's mind, flickered and dissolved into the ether. Marlowe breathed in deeply, his heart still racing. It was over. The architect had fallen. The galaxy, no, humanity, was free. But as the crew stood in stunned silence, the enormity of their victory began to sink in. They had faced the impossible, defied fate itself, and emerged victorious. The architect's reign of control had ended, and the war was over. But there was no celebration. Not yet.